Now, for those Aussies in the audience, you may have seen in the news that Optus is absolutely getting raked over the coals and dragged before government ministers to answer for the OOO debacle that's allegedly cost people their lives. For those of you across the seas, let me translate that. Our second biggest telephone company has been caught out, failing to take emergency calls and allegedly tried to cover up that they hadn't. Imagine calling 911 or 999 and all you get is dead air. That's allegedly what's happened for 13 hours last month, with hundreds of emergency calls going unanswered and at least 3 deaths confirmed as a result. The blame game is in full swing, with claims of human error on a dodgy upgrade, offshore call centres supposedly in India and the Philippines twiddling their thumbs, and a government that's been caught napping on watchdog plans. Stick around as we look a little deeper into how Optus allegedly turned Australia's lifeline into a noose.
Emails and text messages reveal Optus bosses had initially dramatically underestimated the scale of the telco's deadly 000 crisis as it unfolded last week. It took 24 hours before the telco actually realised the seriousness.
Hi Barnaby, it's Felicity from Optus. Please give me a call when you get this. A major issue. Now, Jane, 3 people died when emergency calls wouldn't connect, with the telco blaming human error.
For a bit of background, Optus is Australia's second largest telecommunications provider, our second biggest phone carrier next to Telstra, which, to be fair, Telstra was the one previously known as Telecom and was 100% owned by the federal government in one shape or form from 1901 through to 1997, when John Howard privatised it and it became Telstra. So they had a massive leg up in the market with all of their infrastructure, etc., already in place by the time the federal government handed over the keys. Optus, on the other hand, has been around since 1981, starting as another government-owned entity that was used to operate the nation's first national satellite system. AusSat was privatised and became Optus in 1991. Optus is now a subsidiary of Singapore's Singtel company. Telstra supposedly has between 40 and 45% of the total market share here in Australia, with Optus having between 25 and 30% depending on the sources. Optus has faced repeated scrutiny over data protection and network failures that have compromised public safety, particularly in relation to the country's emergency services hotline known as 000.
In breaking news now, Optus has confirmed another 000 outage. 9 people in New South Wales were unable to contact emergency services between 3 a.m. and midday yesterday. The telco says all callers who dialed 000 are okay and has issued an apology to its customers.
As I said, this is the number that serves as the Australian equivalent of 911 in the United States, handling urgent calls for police, fire and ambulance services. The company's history of outages dates back to at least 2022, when a massive data breach exposed the personal information of millions of customers, leading to widespread criticism and regulatory fines. In that incident, hackers accessed sensitive data, including passports and driver's licenses, prompting lawsuits. There was also a $100 million penalty for misleading sales practices, though the breach itself highlighted deeper issues with Optus's infrastructure security and operational reliability. To make matters worse, in November of 23, the whole Optus network shit the bed, disrupting services for over 10 million customers and preventing 228 emergency calls from connecting to 000. So just going to jump in here quickly, because after I was done with the initial pre-record, I actually came across another news article that said that the original Senate inquiry in 2023, they said that there were only 228 calls that failed to connect to 000. As it turns out, last year in 2024, they revised that figure as saying that they had found an additional 2,468 customers that had tried to make 000 calls from their mobiles on November 8. Almost 3,000 instead of 228. That's a slight difference. That event led to the resignation of the then CEO after a Senate inquiry exposed failures in communication and contingency planning. The Australian Communications and Media Authority, ACMA, later fined Optus over $12 million for not ensuring access to emergency services for 2,145 people, and for failing to conduct welfare checks on the 369 affected individuals who had tried to call 000. You'd think that'd be a wake-up call, right? Wrong. Fast forward to 2025 and Optus has found itself mixed up in what has supposedly been dubbed as the 000 failure scandal, a series of outages that have reignited public outrage and calls for accountability. The most severe incident unfolded on September 18, 2025, when a scheduled firewall upgrade in South Australia triggered a 13-hour communications blackout affecting multiple regions. Firewall upgrade. Sounds harmless, like updating your laptop's antivirus. But no, these geniuses forgot to divert the 000 calls during the period. The upgrade went awry, supposedly due to human error. Specifically, someone allegedly deviated from standard procedures, such as diverting the calls away from the core network during maintenance.
The incident on the 18th was a process-related incident. People made mistakes.
As a result, approximately 600 emergency calls failed to connect, primarily impacting users in South Australia, Western Australia, the Northern Territory, and parts of southwestern New South Wales. Optus executives later admitted that the company remained unaware of the full extent of the problem for hours, despite having received at least 5 customer complaints about the outage through offshore call centres based in India and the Philippines.
First email from the telco to the Federal Department of Communications was mid-afternoon. It said, "Hi team, I've just been informed that Optus has received reports that some customers in WA and SA are experiencing impact to 000 calls."
24
7 minutes
hours
later, there was a follow-up that said, "I've been advised the work to rectify the issue is complete and services have returned to normal." It estimated at the time 10 calls may have been impacted. It wasn't until 24 hours later that an SOS text went out to the Communications Minister's Chief of Staff. "Hi Barnaby, it's Felicity from Optus. Please give me a call when you get this. A major issue."
These centres, supposedly outsourced to reduce costs, allegedly failed to tell anyone important about the reports and therefore allowed the disruption to go unchecked for additional hours. But here's the gut punch. Welfare checks conducted after everything came to light revealed that at least 3 people had died because they could not reach emergency services in time.
It certainly has not been good news for the new CEO of Optus, announcing a tragic failure, not just a disastrous, but a tragic failure of its systems in South Australia, Western Australia and Northern Territory. The 000 systems failed. There were 600 customers who were impacted by this, trying to call for an emergency, but never got through. But even worse, 3 people, 2 from South Australia and 1 from Western Australia, didn't get the help that they needed and they passed away.
A 49-year-old man and a 74-year-old woman from Perth in Western Australia and a 68-year-old woman from Adelaide in South Australia. Initial reports also linked the death of an 8-week-old baby in South Australia to the outage, but police investigations later determined it was unlikely related, attributing the infant's passing to other factors. Nonetheless, authorities in Western Australia believe a 4th death may be connected, bringing the potential toll to 4 lives lost. The South Australian Premier expressed fury over the delayed notification, learning of the fatalities only during a press conference. Imagine being that. You're up there trying to sound all important, and someone whispers in your ear, "Yeah, by the way, we've had 3 members of the public die because they couldn't call 000. Optus CEO Stephen Rue issued a public apology stating, "I would like to reiterate how sorry I am about the very sad loss of the lives of 4 people who could not reach emergency services during their time of need. In my personal opinion, outsourcing your emergency backbone to the lowest bidder is kind of like handing your wallet to a pickpocket and acting surprised when it's gone, then saying you didn't see it coming. I mean, pull the other one, mate." But wait, there's more, just like a bad infomercial. They allegedly didn't tell the public for 40 hours and only told the regulators after their issue had been fixed. The Australian Communications Media Authority launched a formal investigation into the handling of the outage, noting that Optus did not notify regulators until after the issue was resolved, contravening standard protocols. Now look, just quickly, if you made it this far, I kind of feel like I've already earned the like on the video. It's more important these days than you subscribing, but hey, feel free to do both if you want, or even leave a comment if you're feeling bold. Public and political backlash has been swift and intense. Communications Minister Annika Wells described the outage as an absolutely shocking failure and unbelievable disappointment, emphasising that the telecommunications providers have no excuse for lapses in emergency services.
"This is completely unacceptable and they cannot allow this to happen again."
She warned of significant consequences for Optus.
"I have said that Optus will face significant consequences as a result of what has happened here,
including potentially multi-million-dollar fines, and suggesting that Rue should consider resigning, echoing calls from Prime Minister Anthony Albanese.
Optus has let down its customers and has let down the nation.
But, in my personal opinion, that is a very weaselly attempt at deflection, and she's been rightly criticised for the inaction of the government. It's easy to slag Optus, but the government's meant to oversee this shit. In a country as bushfire-prone and dangerous critter-filled as Oz, reliable 000 access is life or death. This scandal's a wake-up call. Stop the outsourcing circle jerk and invest in some redundancies for God's sakes. A previous Optus outage in November of 2023 led to a review by the Labor federal government yeah, Australian governments seem to do a lot of those reviews that seem to go nowhere.
After a nationwide Optus outage in 2023, an independent review handed down 18 recommendations to government, including setting up an emergency call custodian, yet to be legislated.
The review that became known as the Bean Review gave 18 recommendations in order to prevent further Optus outages, which were handed to the feds in March of 2024. 18 months later, a third of those recommendations have still not been implemented.
Now, there are recommendations sitting with this government from 2023 and no indication that they've been implemented. So it's not good enough and Australians need answers.
They've been sitting on a national 000 watchdog plan for over a year. It could have already been in place so they could force instant alerts, but no, they've been too busy virtue signalling all over the place. And so Annika Wells has, in my opinion, had the balls to be defending herself, saying that she's still new to being a communications minister. You've had 18 months. Now, I just got to jump in and fact check myself again. Annika Wells has been the communication minister since Labor took the second term in May this year. Prior to that, it was Michelle Rowlands. However, I would still expect that she would have a handover and be briefed in relation to things like, a massive federal review into her portfolio that took place in the last year and a half. So the 18 months, as far as I'm concerned, still stands because she should have been provided with the information. But more to the point, why didn't Michelle Rowlands act on it during the period that she was a communications minister? I have some significant questions. You're in charge of communications for the country. It's literally your only job to keep an eye on the telephone and internet and keep them up to snuff for Australians. What a crock of shit. Opposition leader Susan Ley, demanded an independent inquiry into the entire 000 network, criticising Wells for being overseas during the crisis and accusing the Labor government of inaction. Well, experts and commentators also pointed out that the privatisation of Australia's telecommunications sector in the 1990s and early 2000s was a root cause, arguing that successive governments, both Labor and the Coalition, have adopted a hands-off approach. Former competition watchdog heads have questioned the Albanese government's oversight, highlighting how the sale of Telstra created overlapping private networks in a vast low-density country, exacerbating coverage gaps. Now, I'll be fair, that's not strictly Albanese's problem. John Howard was the one that privatised telecom to begin with, but I think that successive governments have compounded the issues, particularly when they do a half-assed job of implementing a review over 18 months ago. And I mean, look, I travel into the country for work. I have both Optus and Telstra accounts connected to my phone for better coverage, but even then there are still dead zones. And I've been caught out more than once, but I will say that hasn't happened since I put the Starlink Mini in the car and I've been able to use Wi-Fi calling. There's been at least one occasion where that's kept me from being stuck on the side of the road for the night due to lack of mobile reception from either Optus or Telstra. But anyway, let's get back to Optus. In response to all of this, Optus has announced an independent review led by former National Broadband Network Director Kerry Schott to examine the outage's causes, 000 management, policy adherence, and overall response. Additionally, the company has engaged a US consulting firm to oversee a third review into its network failures, aiming to address cultural and cost-cutting issues. But just as the dust seemed to be settling, and Optus was finally able to take a breath, another outage struck on September 29, 2025, affecting around 4,500 people in New South Wales due to a faulty mobile phone tower. This latest incident lasted from 3 a.m. through to 12:20 p.m, preventing 9 000 calls from connecting. No deaths this time, thankfully. Optus apologises again like a broken record, saying that they'd resolved the issue, but the recurrence has deepened the crisis, prompting the Treasurer Jim Chalmers to stress the need to determine what went wrong. Minister Annika Wells hauls in the CEO of Singtel, Optus's chairman here, John Arthur, as well as Roo, for a bollocking, demanding fixes before the bushfire season.
An embattled Optus leadership team faces the public.
First and foremost, I'd like to apologise. Our hearts goes out to the families and friends of the people who have passed away.
The scandal has broader implications for Australia's telecommunications landscape. Critics are arguing that Optus's repeated failures expose the dangers of relying on privatised, profit-driven entities for essential services, particularly in a country prone to natural disasters where reliable emergency communications are vital. The Greens Party, there we go, has advocated for renationalising aspects of the centre. I disagree with that. I'd say just enforce the bloody rules without turning it into a socialist wet dream. Public trust in Optus has supposedly plummeted, with many customers switching providers amid calls for boycotts. As investigations continue, the focus remains on preventing future tragedies, with potential reforms including enhanced monitoring, mandatory redundancy systems for emergency calls, and penalties that could reach tens of millions. This episode is a reminder of the human cost when corporate efficiencies clash with public safety imperatives, leaving Australians questioning whether the emergency lifeline is truly secure. So what's the TLDR out of all of this? Optus's firewall upgrade screw-up allegedly killed people. Offshore call centre fails amplified it, and as usual, the government's asleep at the wheel. I can't see that things are going to get too much better anytime soon. So please, people, take precautions. Have multiple ways to contact emergency services if you need them. If you're out in the country or you travel through black spots like me, maybe invest in a personal locator beacon that doesn't rely on mobile cell coverage. Because let's face it, even when you get through on the phone, when seconds count, the police are minutes away. But that's a topic for another video. Cheers, legends, and stay safe out there.